Welcome to another Kundalini conversation. I'm your host, Brent Spirit, and I am so excited and honored to have Emma Bragdon with me here today. Hey, Emma, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much, Brent. I'm pleased to be here, honored to be here. Think what you're doing is totally wonderful. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So, Emma is an expert coach with over 60 years of Kundalini process experience. She's a consultant, a teacher with over 30 years of experience. She's written 7 books, including The Call of Spiritual Emergency and Helping People with Spiritual Problems. And she's co-produced 2 documentary films on bridging spirituality and health. Emma is the founder and executive director of the Integrative Mental Health University, IMHU, a not-for-profit online learning platform that offers certification for spiritual emergence coaches with more than 40 courses on various topics bridging mental health and spirituality, including Kundalini, bioenergy, and awakening. I recently took that course. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. The links to all of Emma's material and ways to connect with Emma will be in the description, of course. So Emma, today I'm very excited to learn about your Kundalini awakening process, to find out a little bit about some of the solutions you found to some of those challenges. And then, of course, you've gone on to serve others dealing with similar challenges in such a profound way relating to spiritual emergence, Kundalini. So I'm hoping we'll have some interesting themes come out throughout our conversation. We've got a few things on the list here, but why don't we just give you a chance to take it away and we'll see where things go. So take us back to when all of this Kundalini process began to sort of stir in your system.
Okay, that's a great question. Great way to put it there, Brent. So, I was drawn into moving towards higher consciousness from a very young age, and I didn't have the language of Kundalini at that time. But I want to put my story in a bit of context, okay? So I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1946, right after the Second World War. An exciting time, but also one where there was a lot of shock in everyone's system getting over a war. And I was born into a family that was very well educated, and my father a scientist who was very oriented towards the material world. Great man, very intelligent. So I would say that the language of spiritual experience and Kundalini was far from anything that my family was familiar with. And I started having an intention to move into higher states of consciousness very early, although I had no language for it. And I would say, given the language I have now, that I was clairsentient from a very young age. So that meant that I was telepathic in some ways, but was sensing other people's feelings and being able to move into a kind of truth that other people didn't have access to. And I felt a bit like a stranger in a strange land. But the context behind my story, I think, is that we are, all of us, at a time in human evolution where we're moving into what the ancient Indian rishis called the Dwapara age, which means that more people are being born with some psychic abilities like clairsentience, clairaudience, clairvoyance. More people are being born with a desire to reach higher states of consciousness without any notion of what that is or what the language is or how to do it or where to find some help. And so there are more children who have these abilities, but there's also a flow of more interest in this particular area. But back in 1946, 50, in the 50s and early 60s, it was very much out of people's awareness. So, but I had a very strong intention, even though I couldn't put it in words. The intention was there towards this kind of evolution of consciousness. And the universe, as it were, or all it is, was providing the impetus for moving in that evolutionary way. So I would say then that I was having Kundalini experiences from a very young age, meaning these kinds of psychic openings that can occur to people. And like a lot of people who are having these Kundalini awakenings, I also felt estranged, like I didn't fit in. I wasn't sure how to relate to people. I couldn't tell my story. So it can be very isolating. And so I moved along in life as best I could. I accumulated some pretty deep trauma as a young person, feeling more and more estranged. And then by the time I got to be by the time I was 18, I'd had 2 near-death experiences. And so that meant at the age of 3 and the age of 8, I had been catapulted into an experience of tremendous love and bliss that we could say is part of highest consciousness when one experiences a union with all that is. So I'd had that experience, but I didn't want to have to die over and over again to get it. And when I was introduced to meditation when I was 18, I had an experience of bliss and ecstasy within a minute or two. And I thought, aha, okay, here's a path that's viable. I can get into those higher states of consciousness without having to die. And so my process, my intentionality for higher consciousness became more articulated and more well-defined. So, but I didn't have the language of Kundalini at that time. But I was having a lot of what people think of as marker points, or from a medical perspective, symptoms of Kundalini. And I don't like the medical perspective on it. I prefer a marker point or a sign of Kundalini. But clearly I was having experiences that are associated with moving into higher consciousness, which is what Kundalini is really all about. So from age 18, I made my way into Buddhism. And by the time I was 20, I was living in a Zen Buddhist center that was guided by someone who was considered enlightened. And this was not just by the community. This was an international recognition of the height of his consciousness and his intention to teach others. And I was within that community for 4 years. And the only reason I left it is because he passed away and I didn't feel aligned with the person who took his place. But during that time, I also had other experiences in meditation that were astounding to me, that are also markers of Kundalini, even though I didn't call it that. So for instance, at one point I was asked to sit meditation for 4 days. So that meant I was allowed to sleep between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. I could clearly go and use the restroom when I needed to. But outside of that, I was in the meditation room. And at a certain point into the intensity of this retreat, my body started shaking uncontrollably. And I thought, what's this all about? I don't get it, but that's what was happening. And the formality of Zen Buddhism had me sit in a particular way, but it was extremely difficult to hold on to those postures, that posture rather. And then after a bit of the shaking, I realized I was also moving into a kind of bliss that I had never known before. It just felt like, this is going to last forever. You've made it, Emma. This is it. So, shaking and then bliss. And I didn't have the language for it. I just thought something really profound has just happened. I'll have it for the rest of my life. I got up off the cushion. I ran to the cabin where Suzuki did his consultations and walked in, and I thought, okay, he's going to give me an A+ and tell me that my retreat's over. He smiled. He was very kind. And he nodded, he understood where I was. And then he said, now go back to meditation. And I thought, what? I made it. I want to go sing and dance. What's happening here? I couldn't understand it. And I went back and I started to understand that life here on planet Earth has its highs and lows. And a better place to be is to really observe it without being completely identified with it. So that was an extremely powerful insight for me. And I continued to go in and out of some kind of physical manifestations of energy moving through my system. But again, no language of Kundalini. So this continued for a while, but I was not on retreat forever. So when I left the retreat, I talked to a friend and I said, I don't know why this shaking's going on. I don't get it. And he said, well, you know, it could be a result of some repressed, strong feelings that you have, maybe from childhood or something else. And why don't you try a bioenergetic therapist? I know a really good one. I'd never heard of a bioenergetic therapist before. You know, my parents were quite conventional and psychiatry was it, and there wasn't much else. Anyway, I went to the bioenergetic therapist who put me in to begin the therapy into a kind of stress position. We could call it like an asana, but it opened up the chest and opened the heart chakra. And then I was supposed to breathe in a more intense way. And suddenly this absolute waterfall of big emotions started emerging. And I was shocked. I had no idea that was within me. Well, to make this part of my journey shorter than it, to make a long story short, I did that kind of therapy for several years and became so impressed with it that I took the training and became a bioenergetic therapist. So I could also help others who had strong emotion in their system that was blocking their energy so that they could release those energy blockages and move into a more expansive energy system, but also it raises consciousness because when we release energetic blocks, our awareness also expands. So I thought, aha, I've found my niche. I'm going to do this and I'm going to continue meditating, both. So I did that for a while. And then I thought I'd like to return to graduate school and become licensed as a therapist and be able to offer my perspective around the benefits of doing meditation, moving into higher states of consciousness, and also the benefits of releasing energy that's blocked in the system so that the body can move into a healthier energetic system and that consciousness is more free to move into the higher chakras. So I went through graduate school, and I want to say that in graduate school, on the fringes, it was not part of the program, right? It was in the shadows or on the fringes. I was introduced to MDMA as a psychotherapeutic tool, meaning ecstasy, sometimes on the street called Molly. But this was introduced by a clinical psychologist who had access to the most pure form and was able to offer this in a therapeutic context. And he was not only a clinical psychologist, but an energy worker. So I had training from him, and it was astounding training, astounding experiences. And then I was able also to offer that to others. But that was yet another way to combine a real deep access into consciousness with a tool that can expand consciousness without getting waylaid by emotional parts of the pain body. That the way it's called now is where we store pain in the body. So I was able to be a sitter for a while until MDMA became illegal in 1985. But I want to say that that was also part of me opening up my consciousness in a safe manner, doing that psychedelic assisted psychotherapy in a very responsible way. So I was glad for that experience. But still, I wasn't really thinking about Kundalini very much. And but I was in a position to, after graduate school, do psychotherapy, specifically working with people in a spiritual awakening process who were having trouble integrating whatever it was that they were running up against. So I started specializing in that around 1990, over 34 years ago. And that's been an extraordinary experience. I've learned a tremendous amount from the people I've worked with. I feel like I've been tremendously fortunate to work with people in a very deep process. And in 2012, I'm reflecting on how much I'm skipping over, but I don't want this to be all about me. But I'll say in 2012, I joined the Self-Realization Fellowship, which is steeped in yogic philosophy. And at that particular time, especially reading the Bhagavad Gita as is translated by Yogananda, again, another self-realized person who's recognized internationally, I realized, oh, SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship, is really about raising Kundalini. That's the language they're using. Okay, I'm okay with that. That's good. I like that. And then the meditation exercises were all about raising Kundalini in a very safe way. And I thought, well, I don't know about, when I was in the Buddhist community, I saw people who did a lot of meditation and they ended up really having a kind of psychotic type experience and really not knowing where to turn, being in trouble. People didn't understand why. And so I asked nuns and monks in SRF, do people have that experience here with the self-realization techniques? And I heard they'd never heard about it, never heard anyone enter what I would call a spiritual emergency, a crisis that comes when one has strong spiritual experiences but can't integrate it. So so that was very impressive to me. And I continued doing a lot of study and have in the last 12 years continued with study and meditation. And my experience, I can very much relate to the path of Kundalini, which is more well known now. And certainly you do a great job, Brent, in introducing people to that pathway and introducing them to the whole language associated with the path of Kundalini awakening. So I also became much more accustomed to that particular language. Although I still feel that Kundalini is happening in many cultures all over the world in different ways without specifically using the Sanskrit terms. And it's part of the challenge of today, right? Is to help people understand what the process is without necessarily alienating them with what the Sanskrit terms. But just to say that being a member of the Self-Realization Fellowship has been very useful for me because I think that the language that they use is very good for helping people like myself to understand the universality and the normalcy of Kundalini awakening. And also that there is a direct and safe path that people can access all over the world through SRF and through other places too. SRF certainly isn't the only one, but I've become convinced that SRF has a very safe path, and that's why I am talking about it. So it's been very important to me, and I do feel that the more classic examples of moving into light and becoming one with I'll say all that is, or God. It goes by many names, right? that definitely has become part of my experience in meditation. So I can relate very easily to the more classic way of looking at Kundalini, and feel a great deal of pleasure. And I feel like I've become a happier person because of the consistency of using these particular techniques. And they've helped me to integrate further at a deeper level the experiences I had as a child growing up and all the way through my life. How about that?
Brilliant. Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your journey so openly like that, and for first, of course, going through it at such a time period where the language wasn't there. There wasn't the internet. I imagine that, of course, there wasn't, I'm not even, I imagine, I know there wasn't as much cross communication across cultures and religions. So for those out there, not to invalidate the isolation, it could be a lot harder if we had gone through it at a time like Emma, right? We're fortunate enough that we have the internet and some of the words to use. Um, Fascinating. Lots of themes have come up there. I've got a few points that I think I'll maybe fire at you, and we'll see what you can share with us. So you mentioned practicing in Zen.
Yeah.
Very powerful, valid spiritual practices.
Yes.
Um, do you have any comments on, you received the guidance to go back and sit.
Hmm.
Um, I think that if we could go back and sit, the process would continue and unfold. But there's that major question: why isn't anybody else experiencing this? What is this energy? It's nowhere in any that I'm aware of Zen poems and things like that. It seems very foreign and unusual. Um, I did see recently someone within the Zen community, I believe he was a Zen master, spoke about a painting depicting a dragon moving up Mount Fuji. And he said, this is the Kundalini. It's just not overtly discussed, but they're speaking about some energy, but it's very hidden and, don't say much about it. Just sit, allow it to unfold, that sort of thing. Can you comment a little bit about those who maybe find Zen just seeking relief from anxiety, seeking relief from depression, a little curious, and suddenly they find themselves in a place like you? What should they do? And what about those that are teaching Zazen meditation or instructing in Zen? I know
Mm.
it's a bit of a loaded, I just threw a bunch of themes at you. Anything coming to you?
Well, the first thing that came to me was just a little quote from Suzuki. And I don't remember exactly what the question was, but it was someone asking about the rigidity of Zen Buddhism. Because there's a very particular kind of way you're supposed to sit. And in fact, if you're in a serious Zen Buddhist retreat, if you start falling asleep, or if your posture changes and you start falling over, something like that, or bending over, someone may come by with what's called in Japanese a kiyosaku stick, and literally hit you on your shoulders in the fatty part here. So it's not bone on bone, but it wakes you up, and it's supposed to stimulate you so that you wake up if you've been asleep, or you just, it's an energy transmission so you can come back into more awareness. So that's all well and good, but it can seem a little bit like punishment. Like, you're a bad person. You just started falling asleep in meditation. Get on track again. We're going to hit you. So I also, would really look at it sometimes and say, wait a minute, this is awfully rigid. And why can't I go sing and dance when I feel good? That would go through my mind. So Suzuki's one response he gave was, Zen Buddhism is like putting a snake in a rigid pipe, because then it learns its true nature, which is movement, right? It has to move this way, like the Kundalini snake, right? But it won't, what he was saying was, we don't really know our true nature until we go into a system that's quite rigid, that will show us very strongly. So for better or for worse, anyway, that's the quote. And I think that I never heard the word, as I said, I didn't hear the word Kundalini when I was part of the San Francisco Zen Center. Although I read Autobiography of a Yogi during those years I was participating, and I thought, hey, I'm really drawn to this. I don't know who this guy is, but I love what he's saying. But I'm not going anywhere. I've got a self-realized master that I'm working with now. I'm not shopping. But I heard a little bit about it, and I thought, well, you know, Zen is really moving towards becoming extremely wise, gaining insight into the highest levels of consciousness. Sounds good to me. I'd like to get there. So I wasn't going to poo-poo that, but I did feel like something was missing. And when I was invited actually to sit with people who were in an extreme state, what healthcare provider would call psychosis, I realized the teachers didn't know how to cope with this. All they knew to do was send them to a psychiatrist or send them to the hospital because they were crazy. And so I felt like there was a real missing link happening. And I was offering, what would, you know, at the age of 20, I was offering peer support, sitting kindly with someone, being with them, so they weren't isolated and alone. So I can't speak for where Zen Buddhism is today because I left it before I was 25, when my teacher passed away. But I think that it really behooves anyone who's leading retreats or teaching meditation from any culture to learn that people can move into intense spiritual experiences and have no way to orient themselves around it. So it becomes something that's scary, sometimes called even an adverse experience, or something that results in meditation sickness. So there's a whole language around this now, but it basically amounts to the fact that we're growing up being told that nothing is real unless we can see it, feel it, touch it, taste it, use our five senses to measure it. And thus, when people run into a spiritual or intuitional experience, they are thrown into, well, what's real? Anyway, I don't know what's going on here. What's real about me? What's real about my life? And anyone who's leading retreats, leading meditation or yoga or anything that will stimulate spiritual experiences really needs to learn how to recognize the crises that people can have when they're having spiritual experiences and learn how to support them without pathologizing. It's not about pathology. It's not about mental illness. It's about a person being disoriented by strong experiences.
Right.
That's my soapbox.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Lots to consider. And I'm going to meditate on that little story you shared about what Suzuki mentioned about the snake in the pipe. I need to unpack that a bit in my own practice. So thank you for that. So on the heels of what you were just sharing, working as a therapist, as a counselor, we see today the prevalence of something like, say, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, rooted in mindfulness. Marshall Linehan, the founder, Zen master. But even more removed from spiritual experiences are something like DBT skills. But people are being taught these things. They're being supported in therapy to learn mindfulness. And I can imagine that there are some people that are also having now, like you mentioned, adverse effects of meditation, adverse effects of mindfulness. Can you have anything to say about where mindfulness is going, and if there's anything that needs to be considered before a therapist, a teacher just says, hey, mindfulness is the solution to you know, your depression or your anxiety or, you know, your emotional challenges? Because we know that mindfulness can open up a whole energetic experience like what happened to you.
Yeah, I wasn't a practitioner of mindfulness. It was Zen Buddhism, which
Right.
really has deep roots in an ancient tradition or old tradition. But about mindfulness, I've been really interested to learn more about what's called meditation sickness now. I mentioned that. And some people are saying, well, mindfulness is actually a secular approach to something that has always been religious, which is meditation. It's always come out of a religious tradition, but it was brought to the United States and kind of branded, if I can use that term, as a secular practice to help people out of chronic pain or chronic kind of depression or anxiety, as you mentioned. And it can be extremely effective in doing exactly that. And some people are thrilled, happy beyond words that they've been able to find something that helps them with their chronic emotional or physical issues. So, primo for those people. But the what has been termed an adverse experience is if a person runs into a spiritual experience, which kind of blows their circuits, as it were. In other words, takes them into a zone that where they're disoriented. They don't know what's happening and they feel scared. Or one thing that can happen when a person does a long retreat, like insight meditation, mindfulness, is that maybe on the third, fourth day of a 7-day retreat, they start having flashbacks to trauma. And then they say, well, wait a minute, I'm here because I want more peace. This isn't more peace. This is horrible. I don't want to go there. I've done everything I can not to go there in my life. I need help. But I'm ashamed. Here I am in a meditation retreat. I'm not supposed to be talking about my trauma.
Yeah.
So that, of course, can be called an adverse experience. Now, the people who are using this kind of language are saying, you know, the most popular form of meditation today is mindfulness. And the most popular way to talk about it is saying it will bring peace, more peace, and a relief from chronic issues. So all well and good, but the angle they're coming at is, well, we need to tell them that they might have an adverse experience too, like going into trauma from the past or having a spiritual experience they are not oriented about. And so that's important, but we also need to tell the teachers that people might be having adverse experiences and they need to know what to do about it. Well, from my point of view, you know, and what is also written by these people is that when we secularized, as it were, meditation, we lost the roots of ancient wisdom that would say, okay, if a person runs into past trauma, here's what you do. Or if a person runs into a big experience and they feel disoriented by it, here's what you do as a teacher. So that's just beginning to come into our purview through researchers who've gone into the ancient texts. But there's still a sense, I think, with many mindfulness practitioners that, no, we don't want to go there. We don't want religion. And we don't like the word spirituality. We just want to practice that'll make us feel more peaceful and happy. So that's how this conversation about adverse experiences and mindfulness has come about, is because most people think of meditation as mindfulness. And now we're at a stage where we're saying something's missing. And so from my point of view, these experiences that come up in meditation are a doorway into higher consciousness if we deal with them in an appropriate way or get the appropriate kind of help. They aren't adverse at all. They're an opening of the system. It's to be celebrated, but it has to be celebrated with someone who understands what's going on and can be supportive, and that takes some training.
Right.
Did I answer your question, Brent, or did I go on my soapbox again?
Oh, you answered my very convoluted question, so don't sweat it. That was brilliant. Yeah, lots of insight there, and I hear exactly what you're saying. You know, I sat to meditate as a young kid, was feeling anxious, feeling depressed. I heard about this thing, mindfulness meditation, so I tried that, and I had a spiritual opening. I had the beginnings of my Kundalini process, and there was no orientation whatsoever, right? I wasn't looking for any of that. I just heard from these people who said that, you know, they secularized it for me, and that's the way that I interpreted it. And now as I know that you have throughout your career, you meet many people that have come into this type of process, not looking for it, not aware of anything to do with this. The other avenue that many people come into this is through psychedelics. Um,
Yes.
I know, like you mentioned, you've done some work with psychotherapy supported by psychedelics, helping people to integrate their experiences. Any comments on those who may be uh, interested in this new sort of re-welcoming of psychedelics into our
Mm.
culture? What sort of precautions or what sort of considerations might we make as a culture?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, so at it, as I've told in the earlier part of this interview, my process was not very focused on psychedelics, even though I was 20 years old in the 1960s and hanging out near San Francisco. But psychedelics was not my path. I knew already that meditation was going to be my path. That said, I did have a gift from someone who was very familiar with LSD, who said, let me guide you on a trip and you can just see what this is about. And I trusted him. I later married him. But anyway, I had the experience and it was profound. And similarly, in graduate school, in the shadows or the fringes, you know, in the 80s, I had the MDMA experience. And that time as well, I knew meditation was my path, but I thought, well, the LSD was a tremendous opening for me. And what is this in MDMA that people are raving about? I mean, not meaning they're going to dances all the time, but they're saying that there's something really powerful in it. And so I also had very powerful opening experiences that weren't as much physical as they were bringing me into more direct connection with what gives my life meaning and what is my purpose in life. And for that, I'm profoundly grateful. And I feel like the work is really bringing that down to earth. In other words, doing it, doing the path that I feel is laid out for me. So I think psychedelics, if done in a responsible way, meaning with a guide who can prepare a person adequately, as well as sit with them in a dependable, present way, as well as help with integration afterwards. And this might take days. It's not just a couple minutes. But if it's done in that kind of responsible way, that it can have powerful, positive, transformative results. So I feel excited by what's going on right now with those people who are introducing psychedelic assisted psychotherapy or ritual plant medicine use that really is using the plant medicine as a sacrament. So that it's really the intention is to move people into higher states so that they can become more expanded in their consciousness. So I feel like there's great promise in it. And unfortunately, I have friends who are very deeply involved in the forwarding of the best of psychedelics who tell me there have been abuses. And I've heard both in public articles as well as in more private conversations, some of the abuses that have happened. And people really need to be very cautious about who they choose to do the psychedelic or plant medicine work with. Is this person really ethical, grounded in ethics? Are they going to be appropriate in terms of keeping boundaries with the person who is having the psychedelics? So Psychedelics can open you up to be extremely vulnerable, extremely open. And if your guide or sitter or therapist starts advancing on you in a physical way, sometimes people taking psychedelics will say, oh, everything's fine, everything's cool, we're in a God space. But it can be a real violation. And so, and that's not the only kind of abuse that can happen, sexual abuse. So it really behooves people to be very cautious in how they do it. And from my point of view, it can create a tremendous openness, an open door into something greater and higher for you. But it's meditation or something like meditation, which stabilizes the win that a person has gotten through the door that they've opened.
Well said. Yes, well said. It seems that meditation is where virtually everyone ends up landing at some point after navigating throughout all the different things the path has to offer. Hopefully, everyone lands there at some point. Right. So, if we can shift gears a little bit, in exploring some of your work, you had mentioned some of your time exploring Indigenous American spirituality, some practices like the sweat lodge and that sort of thing. I'm curious if you found the Kundalini theme in that paradigm as well, and how it may be recognized or addressed.
So after my teacher Suzuki passed away, I was introduced to a shaman from the Yurok tradition and studied with him for a good period of time, about 20 years, and also with another shaman who was recognized in her tribe, which was close to the Lakota tradition. So yes, I did sweat lodges, especially with the woman who came from the Lakota tradition. But I want to answer your question by telling you about a practice that happened within the Yurok tradition. And that was, if a young person wanted to move into higher states of consciousness, he would or she would put herself under the supervision of someone who was recognized as like a shaman. That would be the more English word that would be used. It could be something else in the Yurok tradition, Yurok language. And then there would be very strict training. Now, one of the trainings that I learned about was through running through the mountains, sometimes barefoot. And what would happen is, as a person did this under the direction of, as I'm calling it, the shaman, to do this as a meditation practice, they actually got to a point where they were flying. In other words, their feet weren't even touching the ground. And so it was accessing very clearly paranormal abilities or extraordinary abilities, which we associate with Kundalini. So at a certain point, as people are developing in their path of Kundalini, they can access extraordinary abilities. For instance, the ability to heal, but also the ability to be even in two places at once, to bilocate. And so there has been talk also of shamans being able to fly and even being able to transform themselves into a bird, for instance. So at one point I was doing a vision quest, which meant I was physically in the desert by myself for 4 days and 3 nights. And there was a shaman at the bottom of the hill where I was doing my vision quest. And he was, as it were, watching me. But he couldn't physically watch me with his physical eyes. But I was aware that there were other ways that he was watching me. And in fact, there was a bird that kept coming and flying where I was. And I thought, sure enough, that could be happening. I don't know. Again, we don't have ways to measure things like this. But within the Native American tradition, there are all kinds of ways that the paranormal enters in, or extraordinary states, that we can use the language of the path of Kundalini to talk about. But within the Native American tradition, with the people that I studied with, they never mentioned Kundalini.
Right.
It just what that integration hadn't happened.
So super incredible. I mean, what you've described there, these are things that are documented within the yogic tradition as siddhis, flying, bilocating, all of these types of things. Also, the sweat lodge itself is a purification environment, right? It's for
Yes.
purification, which is what the Kundalini often forces us into doing, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's very, very interesting. We don't hear too much about the Indigenous American tradition and some of these things. There's not too many books and whatnot available. So it's always nice to hear from somebody like yourself that's had some pretty intense experiences. 4 days in the desert. That's pretty interesting. How did that go for you? Was there any culmination?
Bliss.
Amazing.
I had a great
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Just a great time.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So, on the topic of entities, this is a theme that many that are going through spiritual awakening, emergence, Kundalini awakening, they can sometimes have these challenging experiences where they're having encounters, hearing voices, feeling sort of creatures present, dreams of various demons and things like that, coming to, put simply, bother a person, much more than bother at times, but they
Did you
come to
say
bother.
bother a person?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
in a way like that, right? So I'm curious if you have any things to share for those who may be feeling that they're being troubled by some of these entities and what they can do to manage that type of situation.
Sure. So when I was telling my story, I kind of skipped over about 11 years, where I was spending 6 months out of every year in Brazil. And I was really focusing on what is this spiritual healing that's going on here. And I want to go and watch someone who is extremely well known and extremely effective. And so actually, I went to that particular community. I was profoundly impressed, and people were healing of cancer that they could show you the x-rays of their cancer, and they could show you what the doctor had said, which is you have 3 weeks to live. And then 6 months later, they were totally free of cancer, and you could see that x-ray without any surgery. So what had happened? What was going on there? This is impressive. And I came to understand, when I understood Portuguese better, that actually it was a center for disobsession, which is their word for exorcism or getting rid of negative entities. Now, from the point of view of those of us who speak English, entities have been also thought of as negative patterns of thought. In other words, not as a discrete being entity, but as a negative pattern of thought that a person can just feel victim to. In other words, they have this negative pattern of thought, like, I'm not a good person. I'm not a good person. I should kill myself. I'm not a good person. That's pretty dramatic. But anyway, they can have that kind of pattern of thinking that goes on and on and on. And effective therapy can assist them to get rid of or overcome that pattern of thought. And that can be very effective. From a spiritist point of view, that's not spiritualist, that's spiritist, which is in Brazil. The notion is that beings, sometimes from prior lifetimes, can attach themselves in non-physical form to a person and basically communicate a negative thought to them because they're attached to them. And they can just stay with that person, communicating that particular message and it can be extremely debilitating. So I'm talking about the further reaches of the most extreme circumstances where entities can impact people in a negative way. But the center where I was, I actually ended up working there. So I really got deeply into what was going on there. The center of disobsession that could help people be relieved of cancer, physical and emotional diseases, and addiction, was assisting people to be detached from whatever entity was impacting them. And there could be more than one. So it's the largest center for disobsession in all of South America. It was handling thousands of people a day. So I learned a lot. I had a lot of opportunity to learn. And it became very clear to me, yes, some people will be impacted, maybe not as dramatically to cause cancer or addiction, or a desire to suicide, but impacted in other ways. And yes, there are ways to prevent that kind of impact. And one of the most important ways, which seems relatively simple to me and might be simple for those people who understand Kundalini, is if you meditate in a way, or just focus in a way where you're filling your whole system up with the energy of all that is, let's call it pure light or pure love, we can do this through our intention. All we have to do is say, I am going to fill myself up with that. First, we might imagine it with our inner eye, but if we really focus our full attention on it, the sensation of filling ourselves up with light, so that every cell of our body is filled with light, can happen. People can do it at a very young age. Doesn't matter how old you are. Doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. It's open to everybody. It's free. And if a person fills themselves up with that light, there's no way they can have an attachment or a negative impact from an entity.
Powerful, simple, safe, very clear. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know that will speak to those out there who may be feeling troubled, because I know many on this path experience some difficulty with this. Very interesting. So you've done such amazing work over many decades, working with others, and then also supporting therapists, healers, guides, coaches as well. At IMHU, I know that you have, you offer the certification for spiritual emergence coaches. There's some great courses for those that are working as therapists, healers, and want to expand their knowledge. Do you have any general advice for, say, someone like me? Right now, I'm a graduate student, working as an interning psychotherapist. Any advice for a young person like me moving into this next wave of this really powerful age in our collective evolution?
Well, I'll tell you that there was a woman who came to become a spiritual emergence coach and take the training I offered. She happened to have a son who was 21 years old, who was involved with a spiritual emergency that was catalyzed by his having a mushroom experience that threw him into intense experience that he couldn't make sense of. And what it also brought to mind was some trauma he had in his relationships in his family. And he basically had to drop out of school and was just not able to function in a normal way. So she took the course because she thought, I want to be able to help my son. I want to understand what's going on with him. He's not just bipolar, which is what a healthcare provider would call him. So she took the first course, which we offer, which is called How to Effectively Support Someone in Spiritual Emergency. She loved it. She said, oh, well, I want to get whatever else I can get from this. I want to learn more. So she took the practicum, which assists someone to qualify to be a spiritual emergence coach. It's experiential and it's only done on location. And she got to the end of that and she said, everyone needs to take this course. Everyone, and it's not, and I'm not saying that just to be salesy. I'm saying it to say, there is such ignorance, and I'm not talking about you, Brent. There is such ignorance generally about what a spiritual awakening is about. And that includes Kundalini. People are beginning to learn about it, but there's still so much ignorance around it. And so many people also saying, I don't know what it is, and it's got to be bad. You know, that people just need to understand, especially at this time of evolution, that more people are having these experiences, awakening experiences, whether it's mushrooms or mindfulness meditation or whatever it is. More people are having the experience, and we need to understand how to support them so they get the very best of what can happen through a spiritual awakening, which actually ultimately is more peace, more happiness, access to bliss, and more a sense of what's going on in this universe that we happen to be living in. So there's more inner knowledge that can be really helpful in terms of sorting out how to make it through life in a good way.
Right. That's great. Great to hear, and it makes sense. You know, I was speaking with my supervisor. As an interning psychotherapist, I have a supervisor. I'll consult with her on some cases, and we don't have much of a spiritual orientation in the way that we work. But you know, she did say that ultimately, you know, it's not about their relationship challenges or the addiction challenges or whatever it is. It's what are you here on this earth to do? And that's what we're really doing in therapy. And that's a spiritual question, no doubt about it. That leads to spiritual dimension nonetheless. So I understand what you know, your student was saying, you know, everyone should take this course. This is a spiritual reality. It's not just for some people. We're all going through it. Some don't acknowledge it.
Well, I wouldn't say that the course teaches everyone what their purpose is in life, although for some people, I do get that feedback. Oh, now I know I really know what I want to do. But more importantly, now what people will say is, now I understand what the spiritual awakening process is and what a person might fall into that's difficult or challenging for them, and what the best kind of support looks like and how to give it. Whether you're a mother, like this woman was, I just told the story of, whether you're a mother or a friend or a sister, brother, or whether you're even, maybe more importantly, a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist or someone with a licensed professional who never got this education in graduate school. And that includes nurses and medical doctors.
Yeah. Brilliant. Brilliant. So, of course, we've been talking about some of the offerings at IMHU. We mentioned that you've got some books out. The links will be in the description. Is there anything else that you've got going on that you'd like to let our audience know about if they'd like to connect with you more?
I guess one of the things, this is a little bit off topic, Brent, but
It's okay, please.
I'll make it more on topic. And that is, I did spend a lot of time, as I said, 6 months out of every year for 11 years in Brazil. So it captured my attention, but not just because it was about entities. It was about what is healing and what is the best kind of healing for someone who is disturbed emotionally or is distressed about a spiritual issue. And one of the things that I came by quite early in those 11 years was the Spiritist psychiatric hospitals. So if you can imagine a young person growing up in a family where they don't know anything about psychic experiences and their child has clairsentience, clairaudience, like I did, and they look at the child and go, they need psychiatric help. There's something really off about this person. She's not normal. And so the child feels isolated and pathologized and like they might be crazy, and it's scary, right? So within the spiritist context, they not only offer all of the best kinds of treatment that we have in psychiatry today, but they also offer medical intuitives who can see into a person that, for instance, they may have all kinds of psychic abilities and they just need training, and they need to be with people like themselves so they can come home to themselves and then be able to harness their abilities to have it not only serve themselves, but also serve others. So they have gone into an understanding of spiritual crisis and spiritual emergency, which I think is absolutely far beyond and far more advanced than anything we have in what we say is the first world countries. And not to say that Brazil isn't a first world country, it's but it's thought of as not a first world country. So they've gone into this kind of mode of care as well as diagnostics, and they have for over 100 years set up a kind of training for people who have these kind of psychic sensitivities, so that a person can learn how to harness them and then have it be of use to themselves or others. So that means at a psychiatric hospital, a person would be able to see a psychiatrist or psychologist to handle any kind of psychological material, but also get this kind of training for their psychic abilities and not be pathologized. So it's the most advanced work in spiritual emergency on the planet, as far as I can tell. And so once a year, I take healthcare providers there for a 7-day seminar in which they can interact and with practitioners, meaning psychiatrists, psychologists, but also the medical intuitives, the people who are doing the energy work, the people who are training others. They can really get into what is involved with this kind of way of working with people. And Spiritism is dedicated to helping people spiritually evolve. That's their very, very clear goal. And yet they've developed some things that we certainly don't have yet towards that end, especially for people who are suffering psychologically and spiritually. Yeah.
I'm very intrigued. So where can people find out more if they would like to go deeper into that dimension?
So IMHU.org is the name of the organization that I run. And we have a lot of blog posts that are on Spiritism, but we also have a course which is kind of an armchair view into what is Spiritism all about. So you can do it at home and through sometimes live Zoom discussion, but more importantly, some pre-recorded interviews with people who are practicing. And then the another way is to go into the description of this particular course, the seminar that I'm talking about, which is also at imhu.org. So those are two ways to learn. And then, of course, we have Master Google, and you can always Google Spiritism, but I can't guarantee what you'll come up with because there's a lot of misunderstanding about Spiritism, just like there is about Kundalini. You're not quite sure what you're going to get if you just Google out there. But I will claim to be one of the only people who are English speaker who really understands it from the inside out, because I worked there so long. And I've been honored to be the ambassador of one of the Spiritist psychiatric hospitals. They don't pay me for this. There's no financial remuneration. It's an honoring that I understand what's happening.
Amazing. Well, thank you for bridging that gap for us all. And I know also that you have some books out about Spiritism as well, which I invite others, if they're interested, to check out the links in the description for more about how you can learn more.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Emma, thank you so much for our conversation today, for sharing about your journey, for unpacking some of these various topics related to Kundalini from, you've taken us all around the world in such a clear way, in a sense. So thank you so much. And thank you also for the work that you've done for all of us in this space. Um, Directly or indirectly, I think everyone listening has benefited from your contributions. And so I thank you. I really do. Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Brent. And let me ask you a question. Is there anything that you'd like to tell me about taking that course on Kundalini, Bioenergy, and Awakening that we offer at IMHU? Because I know you signed up for it.
Yeah. So I went through that course, and it's a great uh, deep dive into the various ways of looking at Kundalini and some of the phenomena that we can experience. So you talked about Kriyas. We spoke about bioenergy. There's a presentation that you went deeper into. I forgot the term, but there's that specific age, which the rishis had spoken about. Do you mind saying that term again?
Wapara.
Dwapara, was that with a D?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Dwapara age. So I invite others who are interested in diving deep into Emma and her colleagues' perspectives on Kundalini to check out that course. The link will be in the description as well. And there's many other courses on IMHU, and some of them are available for free as well.
Thank you, Brent. Thanks for just mentioning that. And I'm very dedicated to assisting people in their spiritual emergence process. That it's very safe, and they get the orientation that they need when they need it, and they get the support if they need extra support, and they know where to go for it. So we do have, as you know, a list of over 100 spiritual emergence coaches that are around the world. And so if people are entering into a place where they need some extra support, that's a good place to look. And that's also at the imhu.org site.
Great. And as well, Emma is featured in my new project, KundaliniAwareness.org, in the directory as a mentor available for some consultation and support. If you'd like to connect with Emma directly, please check out her profile there on KundaliniAwareness.org. Emma, thank you so much. It's a great honor to be connected with you and to follow in your footsteps as the best as I can. I really appreciate all of that you've done for us. Thank you.
You're doing a wonderful thing in your work, Brent, and I encourage you to continue on. It's great.
Thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you so much for hanging out with Emma and I today. We'll see you next time. Much love and peace.